Hey, Zona Camp, welcome back. We are going to continue talking about our saying that we learned last talk. 500 women died following
the body.
Yeah, you got it. Yes.
500 women died following the body.
Perfect.
Right.
500 women died following the body. We already talked about the 500.
Yep.
We already talked about the women. We already talked about he died. We're going to talk in this one about following and about the body, all right? When we get down to the following point, what does this mean when it comes to Jesus' resurrection? There's actually 3 different types of people who followed him claiming that he rose from the dead. And that's what we want to break down. So this is like I hope you can handle this, KJ. This is like a sub-point, all right? So under the following mnemonic, not demonic, device.
Good, because we don't deal with demonic
do not
stuff.
do that, no. Mnemonic. Under the memory device of following, there's 3 subcategories. And this is easy. Ready?
Okay.
He had followers who were his friends. He had followers who were his foes. And he had followers who were his family. Friends, foes, family.
3 Fs.
Friendly alliteration
for
for you.
following.
Yeah.
Following, friends, foes, family.
Friends, foes, and families.
Friends, foes, and family.
That's
Yep.
good.
So let's
I'll
talk
remember that.
about the first type of followers he had, all right?
Okay.
Jesus' friends, specifically his disciples, people who really liked him. All 11 of Jesus' disciples began to proclaim that he was God and that he appeared to them after his death. This is a really unpopular thing to do, considering that the government just killed him. Why would you go around telling everybody, hey, he's back and he's God? And he died for claiming he was God.
Yeah.
Why would you put your neck on the line
Right.
if that wasn't true? It doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Peter and John both mentioned the physical nature of Jesus' resurrection. I love this. I want to read 1 John 1, verse 1 and verse 3. He says, what was from the beginning, what we have heard, what we have seen with our eyes, what we have looked at and touched with our hands concerning the word of life. And then 1 John 1, 3. What we have seen and heard, we proclaim to you also, so that you too may have fellowship with us. And indeed, our fellowship is with the Father and with his Son, Jesus Christ. You see, he goes out of his way to say, we saw him, we handled this guy. Like, this isn't like a ghost thing happened.
It was physical.
Physical evidence, right? Peter says something very similar, 2 Peter 1:16. He says, for we did not follow cleverly devised tales when we made known to you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, but we were eyewitnesses of his majesty. He's like, I saw this with my own eyes. You think about the things that they did with Jesus after he rose from the dead. Remember, he's making them breakfast that one morning?
Yep.
They're on the beach and they're out there and they see him, and Peter, he ditches the other guys and makes them row the boat in, right? Typical Peter.
Yeah.
And he swims in, and Jesus is cooking fish there. So think about this. They heard him. They saw him. Peter hugs him. They touched him. He even invites Thomas, touch the nail holes, right?
Right.
They eat with him. Every sense that you have, all 5 of them, they've got with Jesus. That's very interesting, right? And that's what they proclaim, and that's what they stuck to. So saying that they touched him, they've handled him, they've seen him, they ate with him, all of these things, this didn't help them get money, it didn't help them get women, and it didn't help them get power. Those are typically 3 of the things that everyone does stuff for.
They want.
Right.
Yeah. If you're making up a cult, you're trying to get sex, money, or power.
Yep.
They didn't get any of those things, and they went to their deaths proclaiming that this guy rose from the dead. Why would you do that?
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't make a lot of sense. So why would the disciples be willing to die for something that they knew was a lie? Like, once the persecution came, right? Once the pressure was on, somebody would squeal, you'd think, right? So,
Right.
okay, listen, we made it all up. We were at Peter's house. It was late. We thought this would be an interesting prank, something like that. None of them squealed, right?
Always
Right.
one of them.
There's always somebody. There's always somebody. When you threaten their family, we've all seen mafia movies, right?
Right.
That's what happens. We threaten your life, we threaten your family. None of them changed. So because of that fact, this leads a ton of people to conclude that the disciples actually believed Jesus rose from the dead. Now, some will say he didn't really rise from the dead, but they believed he did. So our question becomes, what made them believe he rose from the dead? Like, what was the factor that happened that would lead them to do that? Now, some people will object and say, listen, There are a lot of followers of different religions who are willing to die for their faith, but that doesn't prove that their faith is real, right? And it's true. Muslims, Buddhists, atheists, a lot of people commit extreme devotion to their belief system. But the disciples are in a completely different category, and here's why. Muslims will die for a belief that they hold to because they're trusting Muhammad and his word, right?
Yeah.
The same goes with Mormons, right? They are trusting the word of one person, Joseph Smith, and what he says happened to him with no witnesses around.
Right.
The difference with the disciples is that they all were willing to die, not because of Jesus' teaching, but because of an experience they all claimed to have had publicly with 500 other people and individually. And Jesus appeared to them multiple times over these 40 days. So their claim isn't, I'm devoted to the teachings of the rabbi. Their claim is, he showed up to me from the dead. How do I deny that?
Yeah.
It's completely different from any other religion. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So contemporary martyrs will die for what they believe to be true, but the apostles died for what they knew to be true, because they handled, they saw, they touched, they talked with, all of that stuff. All right, so there is, I love this, the atheist professors. I always go to them.
Yeah.
What do they say about this? There's this German guy, he's got the best name I've ever heard in my life, Gerd Ludemann. If you're out there
awesome.
and you're
Gerd.
thinking of baby names for the future, Gerd. I haven't seen this. It's a pretty sweet one, right? What does he say? He says this, an atheist scholar, he says, it may be taken as historically certain that Peter and the disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which Jesus appeared to them as the risen Christ. He says
Wow.
he didn't really rise from the dead, but they had some kind of an experience that pushed them to the point of believing it and following through, because you can't make sense of it otherwise. Is that interesting?
Yeah.
Paula Fredrickson, she also says this. I know in their own terms what they saw was the raised Jesus. That's what they say, and then all historical evidence that we have afterwards attests to their conviction that that's what they saw. I'm not saying they really did see the raised Jesus. I wasn't there. I don't know what they saw, but I know that as a historian that they must have seen something. That's powerful words from the atheists who don't believe Jesus rose from the dead, right? So the following, 500 women died following the body. We have friends, foes, family. His friends all were willing to die based on the belief that he showed up to them after he died.
Well, Robbie, couldn't someone just say that it was his friend and they wanted their friend to be legit? Doesn't that undermine the idea of using friend as accountability or to make it real?
Yeah, a lot of people will say this. They'll say, well, they were obviously biased and they wanted this to be true. They were probably biased because they believed what Jesus was saying.
Right.
But every single person who's ever lived is biased. And every book ever written is written from a bias. That's why you're writing. So you're writing to communicate your bias.
Right.
So that doesn't disprove what they said. The question that we should ask isn't what did they say about Jesus? We should ask why did they say these things and die for these things, right?
Yeah.
It makes zero sense unless the guy actually came back from the dead. So, all right, so the second point under following is foes. And I did it because it's F, but it's really enemies, right? Think about this. If your enemy agrees with you about something that happened in the world, it probably actually happened because you don't agree on anything.
Right.
Right.
Right?
Right.
We have an enemy of Christianity who agreed Jesus rose from the dead. And his name was the Apostle Paul, right? You remember before Paul converts to Christianity, he's a terrorist, literally.
Yeah.
He's going around, he's killing Christians, he's abducting them, he's taking them back to Jerusalem and putting them on trial so that they can be killed. He is a bad guy. And he's zealous for Judaism, right? He tells us in all of his letters who he was. He says, I was a Pharisee. I was circumcised on the right time. I was from the right tribe. I went to the right schools. I did. He's like, I am legit Jewish. And I was the second smartest person in all of Israel.
Right.
So he says, that's who I am. So the question you got to ask is, why would a guy with that background and his life invested in that all of a sudden just, I'm going to change teams?
Wow.
Yeah.
I hate's a strong word, and I'm going to use it. I hate the Los Angeles Lakers and the San Antonio Spurs. And the reason is because I am a Phoenix Suns fan.
That's right.
There you
And
go.
I love the Suns.
That's right.
There is nothing you could ever do to convince me to change allegiance to a Laker. Like, I can't. That makes me like kind of sick. Yeah, it's and that's for sports. Paul's entire life and eternity and religiosity is wrapped up in this, and all of a sudden he just changes. Why?
Yeah.
Why does he just convert? Well, he actually tells us why. In Galatians, he talks about it, and then there's 3 accounts in Acts that are the same account of his conversion. Twice he's given speeches to people telling them, this is what happened to me, and once it's the historical account. But he says that he was going to arrest Christians, and then Jesus showed up to him and said, why are you persecuting me? And he's like, I don't even know who you are. And he said, I'm Jesus, who you're persecuting, right? And he says, you work for me now. And he blinds him for 3 days.
Yep.
Paul freaks out. He doesn't know what to make of his life. His head's spinning. He goes away to Arabia. For 3 years, he's just trying to figure out what happened to me.
Yeah.
And then he says, okay, because of what happened and that Jesus showed up to me, I'm on his team now. And he goes to Jerusalem and he tries to meet with Jesus' friends. And they were all afraid of him. They thought he was going to kill him, right? But he goes up there, and then after seeing him for 14 years of being a good Christian and teaching people the Bible, they give him the right hand of fellowship. They're like, okay, you're legit now, right? And then he writes all these letters and establishes all these churches. It's awesome, right? What could convince this guy to change side when you're an enemy and you're against this, and then you convert? And this is something I think is fascinating. All of the dudes who study this, right, the atheist guys who even study this, they say, listen, the fact that Paul converted, no one disputes that. They even believe, like, 7 of the letters we have in the Bible, he actually wrote.
Yeah.
They're like, those are legit from that guy. We have eyewitness testimony from him about what happened to him in Galatians. And they say, so the fact that he converted, no one disputes, but why did he convert? He says, it's because Jesus showed up to me. Like, what am I supposed to do with that kind of evidence, right? Exactly. And he switched teams. So I think it's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy, so.
Like, okay, just to play devil's advocate like a little bit. Like this even happens today though. Like, don't people like convert and switch teams all the time? Like recently we've had like a slew of Christian celebrities just abandon the faith and kind of switch teams. So why does Paul's conversion, why does that actually prove?
Yeah. Well, so the thing with the celebrity conversions or anybody converting to a different belief or changing beliefs, it always happens through time of thinking through issues, right? Like, I'm thinking through this, I was contemplating it, I heard a good argument from this guy, oh, that might be true, some more evidence came up, that's kind of a thing. You can't just choose to change your belief. It's not a will thing. You have to be persuaded to change your belief.
Right.
Paul's account isn't that he got persuaded over time by good teaching from the disciples. His report about what happened to him personally was, I was killing Christians, dude showed up to me, everything changed.
Yeah.
Right.
It's so abrupt. All of these celebrities, they'll say, well, over time, I've been thinking about this, I heard about this. That's not Paul's story. Yeah. He says, the guy showed up to me, I didn't know what to do. Yeah. Right? Fascinating. So the third type of follower is Jesus' family. So you have friends, foes, family. This one, I think, is the strongest evidence. So we're just going to focus in on Jesus' brother, James. So James is the second oldest in the family. Jesus is the oldest, James is the next, right? Could you imagine growing up with Jesus as your brother?
Yeah.
He's literally perfect.
Yeah, you don't get away with anything.
Yeah, no.
Bro, he's always telling your mom what happened. Yeah. She's always saying, why can't you be more like Jesus?
Yeah.
And she's right. I mean, it's a terrible situation to be in.
You got the short end of that stick.
Yeah. So if you were in that situation, would you grow up really liking that guy or really hating that guy?
I probably wouldn't like him very much.
Even if he used the line like, you're not my mom, it's like, yeah, but I'm your savior and your creator.
Exactly. Yeah. You would not like the guy, right? It's true. He could do no wrong. He's the golden child. He right?
Can't blame anything on him.
Yeah. And he never helps cover your sin.
Right.
He's not a faithful brother, right?
Right.
So this would make you hate the guy. And it's really interesting because when we read in the Gospels about Jesus' brothers, they hate him. They didn't follow him. They didn't want to be part of his disciples. Yeah. I think this is such an important passage here. John 7, 1 through 5. It says, after these things, Jesus was walking in Galilee because he was unwilling to go to Judea because the Jews were seeking to kill him. That's a great reason not to go over there because they want to kill you. So that's why he's in Galilee, where he's from. Now the feast of the Jews, the feast of Booth, was near. Therefore his brothers came up and said to him, hey, leave here and go to Judea so that your disciples also may see your works, which you're doing. For no one does anything in secret when he himself seeks to be known publicly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world. And then it says, for not even his brothers were believing in him. Mm-hmm. They're literally telling him, go kill yourself. Go show off, big guy. Come on, big shot, like go. Why are you hiding out here? Yeah. Oh, you're afraid they're going to kill you? Go. Yeah. They hated the guy. And you would hate a perfect brother like you would. Yeah. It would be terrible to grow up in this situation. We also have Jesus claiming in Mark that a prophet isn't without honor except in his own hometown, mm-hmm. especially with his own family. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Jesus says, my family doesn't believe me. Right. Yep. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. And then the week after Jesus supposedly rises from the dead, we see his brothers and his sisters and his mom all worshiping and praying to him as God with his disciples. Mm-hmm. What happened? Yeah. These dudes aren't at his death. They don't even care to be at his crucifixion, right? Right. But then all of a sudden, we're worshiping him as God. Let me ask you a question. What could convince you that your brother is God? There is nothing that could convince me my brother's God. Right. And to be honest, even if my brother came back from the dead, I would not believe he's God. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. So what's going on here, right? What happened here? Because this is fascinating. I think that there's two factors you have to be convinced your brother's God. Raising from the dead, really interesting. My brother wouldn't convince me. But if I knew my brother was perfect and holy, 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 and he rose from the dead, and I knew both of those things together, mm-hmm. then I probably would be convinced. And James and the other brothers, Jude, right, and mm-hmm. the sisters, think about this. They had a front row seat to see Jesus do bad stuff. Mm-hmm. Your brothers and sisters know all of the junk you've done in the past.
Teenage years.
Yeah. And they know more than your parents. It's just the truth, right? Yeah. They know all the little. What could convince these guys to worship him as the holy, holy, holy God of Israel? They'd have to know he was perfect, but that would make you hate him. Yeah. But if he rose from the dead, that would convince you he probably is who he says he is. Mm-hmm. I think that is powerful. And James goes on to become the head of the church in Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And he goes on to die a martyr's death for believing his brother's God. Wow. This is strong evidence that something must have happened to him. Yeah. That convinced him that his brother was God. And I think that it's the resurrection. So 500 women died following the body. We followers, right? Friends, foes, family. Let's talk about the body. Where is Jesus' body? Mm. It's been a question asked for 2,000 years. Yep. What happened to the body? The women go to the tomb. They go, did the gardener move it? Where is his body? The empty tomb of Jesus is a historical fact. And here's why. The fact that the earliest believers taught that the tomb was empty in the very town that the tomb was located proves the tomb's empty. Here's what I mean by it. So we're in Phoenix, right? And the Cardinal Stadium, it's out by my house, right? State Farm Stadium. Right. You guys live in the area here, right? In the greater Phoenix area. If I told you last night State Farm Stadium blew up, it's just a crater. Yeah. You could say, you're a really nice guy and you usually tell the truth. Okay, I'll believe you, right? If you want to give me credit. You also might think, I would have heard about this by today. Right. It's the afternoon. Like I would have
swing by it.
Yeah, maybe I'll drive by it today. But if I was trying to create a cult based on the belief that State Farm Stadium blew up in the town where it exists, if it didn't blow up, nobody's going to follow my cult. Right. Mm-hmm. I could go to India and tell people about it because they couldn't verify it.
Can't go.
The fact that they were saying the tomb's empty in the town where people could go check it out mm-hmm. proves the tomb was empty because Christianity could never have started mm-hmm. if the tomb wasn't empty. Right. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think that is a strong evidence that something happened. The other reason that we have to know his body was gone, the tomb was empty, is because you have all of the government officials who killed him. If your disciples are going around saying he rose from the dead, wouldn't you say, let's just get the body out here and we'll parade it around town? We'll say, nope, he didn't. Here's his corpse, right?
Right. Yeah.
So you have the Jewish leaders, and they don't pull out his body and stop this movement. Right. The Roman soldiers, they don't pull out his body and stop the movement. Mm-hmm. Pilate, who had him executed, he doesn't. Herod, who's the semi-king of he doesn't. Yeah. They all had the motive to do it, and they all had the ability to do it. and they didn't do it. Why? Because they didn't know where the body was. Because the tomb was empty. So I think that those things really make a strong evidence that something happened with the tomb being empty. And then, whoa, man, all his friends, foes, and family all say he showed up to him. And then 500 people said they saw him at the same time. And then, we know he died. He was stabbed through the heart, right?
Yeah.
And women at the tomb, embarrassing. These evidences, I think, are a really good cumulative case to go, the resurrection hypothesis makes the most sense of it all, right?
Yeah, but Robbie, an empty tomb doesn't necessarily mean a resurrection.
Yeah.
I mean, I've done a little bit of research in this, and I know that there are people who would rob tombs because of the stuff that was left in the tombs that they got buried with.
Yeah.
So what would you say to somebody that says that doesn't mean anything?
Right.
There's a couple of things about that. Because, grave robbery happens, right? We're kind of robbing graves in Egypt right now. Like, they're like 4,000 years old.
Yeah.
We're still going to take stuff. But, people do that. It's really hard to convince me that Jews who had all the cleanliness laws about not touching the dead would go rob graves.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Because that would make you ceremonially unclean. But let's just say they were criminals, so they didn't care, right? Grave robbery could account for the empty tomb, but it doesn't account for the appearances. And it doesn't account for converting Paul. And it doesn't account for 500 people at one time, right?
Yeah.
So, let's say that somebody stole the body. But then the question you have to ask is, well, who did it and why? Was it his disciples? Well, no, then they all died for something they knew was a lie.
Yeah.
Nobody does that, right? So who was the one who stole the body? You get into a weird problem that doesn't really make a lot of sense. We do know that this is fascinating. I love Indiana Jones stuff, archaeology.
Yep.
There's this piece of archaeology. It's called the Nazareth inscription. It's like a marble tablet, not like this tablet, like an actual chiseled in, and it's from about 54 A.D. So probably 24 years after Jesus died and rose from the grave. It's from the Caesar, the king of the world, Claudius, right? And he chisels this thing out, and it basically says, "It's come to my attention that you Jewish people are robbing graves. And if you move a body from a grave, if you rob a grave, if you do something with the body that dishonors it, I will kill you."
Wow.
This is the Cliff Notes version of it.
Yeah.
So think about this. And it's called the Nazareth inscription because we found it in Nazareth, Jesus' hometown, which is like podunk nowhere.
Yeah.
It's not even on some maps at the time because it's so small, right? So you think, okay, why did the king of the world send this hardcore edict about don't rob graves and move bodies to the town Jesus is from, and we have never found this edict anywhere else? It seems like it was only sent to Nazareth. I think it's because he heard about the Nazarene who was risen from the dead, and he's like, I'll stop this. Somebody must have stole the body. Even in Matthew, we have the story the Jews made up about, hey, if anybody asks you soldiers what happened to him, say that his disciples came and stole the body.
Right.
We have about 70 years later, there's this church father, Justin Martyr, and he says, dude, people are still saying that the disciples stole the body. And it makes no sense because why would they die for something they knew was a lie, right? So the idea that that happened, I think that it's disproved on for multiple reasons, right? So what explains all these facts about history? I think what explains 500 women died following the body. The only thing that explains it is Jesus actually rose from the dead. It makes sense of all 5 of those points, right? So studying this and understanding what truly happened in history, and that we have a God who doesn't say, just take my word for it. Just trust me, right? Like, that's a bad parent, right?
Yeah.
Because I said so. Like, nobody likes that. But when you say, here's the reasons for it, here's the evidence for it, we have a God who has left us copious amounts of evidence surrounding the most important fact of our faith. If Jesus rose from the grave, Christianity follows. If Jesus didn't rise from the dead, Christianity fails. And we're all fools for following it. We have significant amounts of evidence that he actually rose from the dead. But the question is what are you going to do with that, right? I've been compelled to believe that this guy actually rose from the dead. And he says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. And he says, anyone who comes to me will not perish. And he says, I'm the bread of life. And he offers eternal life based on belief in him. And if you haven't believed in him, check out the evidence yourself. dig into it and say, man, who should I be following? Who should I be trusting? In a day and age like today, there's so many different opinions, right?
Yep.
Jesus, I love it because he says, it's not about my opinion. It's about me doing something no one else has ever done, right? Some people will say, dead people don't come back to life. That's what I'm saying. Dead people do not come back to life. I think we all know that, right? That's why this is a big deal.
Yeah.
And if God wanted to get our attention, what is the type of thing he'd have to do? Something way out of the ordinary, something crazy. And it just so happens that we count time based on this dude.
Right.
A Galilean peasant who never wrote any books, hardly traveled anywhere out of his little country, right? And died. Why do we count history based on that guy? I think because God wants everyone to look towards him because he did something amazing that we should trust in. And that's what's beautiful about Jesus. The currency that God works in is trust.
Right.
It's not work. It's not money. It's not good looks. It's trust. Do you trust me? Do you trust that Jesus did that on the cross for you? Because if you do, you're born again, you're a new creation, and you have eternal life. So I implore you as students, take seriously the claims of Jesus, not just because of what he says, but because of what he did. In the next talk, we're going to get into, well, what do non-Christians argue against this, right? Like, what do they say? No, that can't be true because of this. We're going to give the best reasons they say the resurrection couldn't happen. So I'm looking forward to that.
So good.
Yeah.
Yep.
So good.
Well, thanks so much for being with us in this third talk, and we'll see you in the next one.